Good.
Welcome back to Mind Your Manners. Walt, today we're picking up with character creation, finishing off a couple odds and ends. I think you said we're going to pick up with step 13, is that right?
Yeah, we started step 13, but I want to finish it off completely. And then step 14 is an important one, even for, it's called the mysteries. And I want to mention a couple of things in that step. And then we'll do the character details and kind of round off the character, and then eventually discuss how he, in fact, fits into the On the Silver Way adventure, and perhaps
Perfect.
how he met some of the other characters and the starting point.
So step 13 is standing.
Standing. And one thing I want to do as just a quick preface shout out, on the character sheet, that you've been filling in, I especially like this character sheet. I had designed one that was serviceable and had gone through playtest, and then in the past 6 months, I was lucky enough to get to know one of our Discord HMK members, and he's credited in the book, his name, Paul Klassen, with the character sheet design. And I think he really put it over the top to where I'm obviously biased, but it's a sharp looking character sheet, and I'm very proud of it. I may have set out the landscape, right, the real estate of where things should be, but Paul's input in the final stages of things, and really the entire design, as you see, was his advice. And of course, there's a host of people on the credits page that I'll reference, perhaps if we do more videos. But it just dawned on me as seeing the character sheet in this video, that I wanted to give special thanks to Paul and his input and contribution to that. It's a great character sheet, very clean, and invoking the setting perfectly. And of course, the artwork in the color version was by Mark Grunert, which is the page decor theme.
Yeah, that's a nice piece there.
And that's based upon his the Venarive poetic map that is offered for free on the website, but of course is used throughout the book as a linking image. So anyway, okay. So we rolled your wealth dice at the end of the video.
Yeah, I'm not sure I recorded it properly, so I had 1,000 silver pennies worth of possessions.
That's correct.
2d3 wealth equals 4 is the note that I had.
Yeah, it's the wealth dice are from two sources, and this is these wealth numbers are generally based upon canon references to not generally, actually, the wealth dice are actually created very particular to the canon income table that has appeared in many versions, but can be found in the Venarive publication appendix, where you get these very specific income amounts for nearly all the occupations. So that's where the wealth dice come from. And then rolling them, I threw in the player boon, which of course you don't have to use. So the initial number that you just referenced, the 1,000 pennies, I think I referenced it in the previous video, is you can't cash this in and suddenly start the game with 1,000, 4 pounds of wealth. But these, and you'll see what we are going to dip into. We did it also at the end of the last video. We'll look at the armor. It goes pretty quickly, but you essentially you have to spend all that in possessions. It usually gets expended in arms, armor, some possessions, a horse if your occupation calls for it, and they're quite expensive. So now, if you roll a noble character, you will be substantially wealthier. Although because of the randomness of the wealth dice, I think there is a fair chance of rolling the classic trope of the poor or
Hmm.
the knight on hard times. If you roll those dice low enough, you could that can happen. And then so of course we're looking. Step 13 is on page 51, and we've just discussed possessions. So you have it's wealth times 100. Your wealth was 10. So 1,000 pennies worth of possessions, and then there's a secondary amount of actual coins. 100 pennies of coins that you can. Most people end up dipping into it uh, to spend at character gen, and then you start with the dozens or so of coin left over. Did that answer your question? So you have two amounts. I would just type in 1,000D next to wealth, and then in the coin section write 100. And those are two amounts. You have to spend the first amount as much. You might as well, otherwise you lose it. And then the second amount is discretionary. And
Okay.
then as when you go
So
to pay. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
1,000 D, and then sorry, the second amount was
It's your wealth score times 10. So for you,
wealth
it'd be
score times 10.
100
Okay.
in coin. Yeah.
A 100 in coin. So that's what I start with. 1,000 is what I spend.
And then you can also spend from the 100. So you essentially
Okay.
have 1,100 to spend, 100 of which could be saved.
Okay. There
Uh,
we go. That's
eh,
touched up.
okay. And then, and one thing I want to point out at this stage, this is jumping ahead into the campaign. I mentioned a moment ago the canon income table that has existed for decades. Uh, I guess the most recent version of it in my mind is in the Venarive PDF that I referenced. It's in its Appendix 13, and it shows monthly income of various occupations. The one thing I want to point out is that is technically a canon table that needs clarification, and it has always needed. Exactly what does it include when you say income? There are many players and contributors and designers who have a very close eye on the realistic amount of coinage that's in the amount of coinage that's in a ostensibly realistic medieval setting, and it should not be coin rich. Um,
Right.
Certainly
I
in the
mean, you didn't
rural
have
areas.
banks or anything. You
Well,
weren't
there were
hoarding your money that,
Well,
that
yeah,
well.
in this modern sense, I mean, there were, I guess, I guess for lack of a better word, banks, but not, yeah, it just wasn't. And then this is not, I guess, in other games, certainly in D&D, coins, certainly in earlier editions of D&D, and maybe even the current one, the coins and the amount of money you have has a slightly different application. So, with that said, I do want to point something from the campaign chapter out. Uh, and there's a standing reference, a section. I've got my PDF here on page 414 at the top. So once the game starts, there's a suggestion to every month re-roll your wealth dice in a certain way. It's not quite exactly how you just rolled your dice, but it generates an income that's equivalent to that income table. The income table I keep referencing has a static number. A hide worker typically earns, was it 48 pennies or maybe it's 60 pennies? And it just says that. Now, there are canon references that discuss what that might mean, but what's a little conflicting is sometimes it says it would include your lifestyle, like where your room and board, so that
Hmm.
that number, that 60 pennies that this hide worker that I'm referring to makes every month, uh, is on top of the room and board. Sometimes it says it's not, though. So what I want to point out for these references to wealth dice in HMK is they are at this point at the end of 2024, they are merely replicating the canon table in those figures. And HMK has not addressed what likely needs to be a canon correction or explanation on exactly what the income means. So it could mean so every month I've come up with on page 414 a handy little dice roll that could randomize. So instead of every month getting 60 pennies as a hide worker, it might vary. And it could be upon further research by some of our contributors that that amount might be reduced, that maybe it's not literally 60 pennies.
Mm-hmm.
Some have argued that it should be a tenth of that, maybe just 6 pennies. But for now, I wanted to point out that on page 414, this particular rule is merely replicating, and you'll be surprised at how close it comes to the Venari Ve income table. So that's all it's claiming to do. And so some game masters might want to ratchet down the literal number of coins that you get. But I think part of the fun of Harn World has always been I use the word quaint, which is almost never used positively, but in my mind, there's a quaintness to choosing the hide worker occupation and, making things and just kind of making a living and really getting into the medieval world. Because, of course, Harn World and all its publications and all the fan and contribution make that quite an attractive and you can really manifest a campaign that is a little more humble on those day-to-day existences of the various people in the world. So this is where the income role would become important. But that's all I wanted to say about the standing table, the wealth dice roll, and then how it reappears during the campaign. So I think that's step 13. Let's keep moving along to a very important, and it's the last numbered step, step 14, page 53. And the mysteries is a unifying term. I don't know that it's unique to HMK, but we've certainly formalized it a bit. And it refers to the arcane mysteries, the astral mysteries, and the divine mysteries. We should have an entire 6-hour video on the three mysteries. So I'm not going to delve into it today. But what this page does during character gen is it gives players and GMs explicit steps on how to finish characters and the details of the various skills that they have that are categorized in the three mysteries. For your character, you have no arcane mysteries aside from your spirit skill. That's considered a talent, one of these arcane talents that every being has. But there's no real further explanation needed other than turning to the skill, to the spirit description in the skill chapter. So we would skip the arcane mysteries. And again, I'm looking at page 53, just going down the page. The astral mysteries are one of the greatly expanded sections of this edition of HarnMaster. And it's the largest example of the astral mysteries is shamanism is given special treatment. And then also one thing I always wanted to represent in game characteristics is the fact that in one of the oldest original articles written about the Harnic elves, they are described as entering in these periodic reveries of, and that's in so a lot of description was given to this endeavor, but I have formalized it as if you're playing an elven character. Oh, and the term Aelrine is a broad term that means elven folk. When you turn to the bestiary and look up elves in there, you'll see that there are half a dozen scattered throughout the entire world of different types. The most famous are the Sinai of the island of Harn. Uh, so we'll skip the astral mysteries for now.
Okay.
The divine mysteries, actually, with your humble ritual ML 12 or 13, I think you had selected the peony.
Yep, 13.
Okay. So as you can see, and we rolled for your grace. You are not in a state of grace at the beginning of the campaign. So we would skip that. So you can see that if you were making I'm scrolling to page 54. If you were making a Shep Pavar character of any age, young, mature, or old, page 54 will take you through the quite, I would say, extensive steps of finishing a Shekpavar character. Young Shekpavar typically start with around a dozen or so spells. It can, and there's a subsystem here for selecting starting with a pool of spell points that you purchase spells. That's probably worth almost, its own hour-long video. Maybe we do that as we come to the video with a Shek Pavar character all but completed, and we just go through the 8 steps here.
Yeah, I'm curious. Do you have any guidance for GMs that are starting a campaign with multiple Shekpavar characters? Like, let's say we're going to run like a Chantry or something.
Yeah, I do. I guess, yeah.
Let me put you on the spot, Walt.
No. This is something I thought about and was considering mentioning, that all editions of HarnMaster have implied that the players of a Shekpavar character either can or should create their own spells. That it's attempted to attempted to imply the uniqueness of spell casting. That each individual spellcaster, that you might be learning a similar spell, but it has always encouraged the players and game masters to create their own spells, which I think is a fine sort of theoretical encouragement. And other games, Ars Magica, have versions of it. Chivalry and sorcery to a certain extent, and other games have attempted, the spell creation approach. But there's also canon references, and I want to point out that the HMK Magic drew heavily on one of my favorite Harn World publications of all time, and that is the essentially the HMG Magic PDF. It's called Shekpavar, and that's what it was called in previous editions too. But there were a host of optional rules in that HMG Magic PDF that are raw. They are the rules now, because I've always liked them. Players will recognize them. But in that, and that of course was written by Crosby himself. But in it, he makes reference that it's not required that Shekpavar create their own spells. And as everyone knows, if you're playing a Shekpavar character, you start with the equivalent of Detect Magic, and there's 2 or 3 that everyone starts with. So they're ostensibly taught those spells by their masters, which implies that indeed not all spells are just created, that there's a sort of a canon list of spells that you're taught. And Crosby in the HMG Magic actually references, and I can find the quote and post it, where he says you can learn other spells in a very, for lack of a better word, a D&D sense, right? You learn Fireball. So the desire for that all players of Shekpavar create their own spells is laudable. I would say, practically speaking, nearly impossible for new players, unless you want to spend months reading the spell lists and you can. And I'm not saying players haven't done that in the past, but I also wanted to point out to veteran players that there's canon reference to the fact that these spells are formulaic, that when you learn. So long story short, in HMK, you're presented with over 200 spells, divided into there are 6 convocations, and then there's a neutral one, the gray mysteries. So there's ample spells to select from. So that's my long-winded first advice. First bit of advice is just embrace as a Shekpavar player, a player of a Shekpavar character.
Well, let me
Yeah.
fine tune the question just a little bit.
Okay.
If someone says, "Hey, we're gonna create a campaign.
Uh-huh.
It's gonna focus around these magic users,"
Yeah.
as far as like minimum skills that you should kind of tweak to make that possible,
Mm-hmm.
where do you start? I mean,
Okay. That's a great question. In HMK, everything is funneled about through Shekpavar. The Shekpavar study of magic in game is funneled through a single skill called Pavarism. We could go to page 46, which is the skills list table. Uh, yeah, let's just, and I'll point. Let's see, 40. Yeah, page 46. Sorry, you can see in the lower right hand corner are the core esoterica skills, and the third one down is called Pavarism. So you only need to develop that one skill, and if
which
you
is
look,
based off of aura and reason.
that's right, or in reason. You see the other arcane mysteries: alchemy, astrology, Pavarism, runecraft. Summoning is an arcane mystery, the summoning of demons. Uh, Tarot tree. The last one, trance, is actually the core skill of shaman characters, which is sort of technically an astral mystery. So the arcane and the astral mysteries are a bit of a subcategory unified under the term esoterica. Some of this is redundant in terms of the meaning of the words, but if you just embrace these as game terms, so notice that the divine mysteries are not considered esoterica. The single for them, aside from just being in a state of grace, which is not a skill, the ritual skill is the core skill of religious characters, whether you're a priest or not. And notice that's a lore skill. It's a mundane skill, will and reasoning. Aura plays no part in necessarily the divine mysteries. So let's see. I guess to answer your question, it's Pavarism skill. That's the
Yep.
only one you have to worry about. There is no. This is a focusing of the HMG approach, which had a slightly different approach where each spell is its own skill ML. You can, once the game starts, treat each spell as its own skill ML, and you would develop it separately. But during character gen, the only skill you develop for a Shekpavar character is Pavarism. And so, these various, my already famous, charm skill multiple that I cheated you of, these skills end up at SM3, SM4, SM5, what have you. You'll end up with a Pavarism ML at the end of character gen. And so when you go to step 14, which we'll go back to, based upon if you look at the upper left-hand corner of page 54, according to your age group and your Pavarism ML, you generate a number of arcane research points. These arcane research points are only used during character gen, which is not unlike previous editions. They did a version of this. And then there's a formula for quote unquote purchasing your spells. You get a few that are taught to you for free, and then you purchase, and like in mini games, HarnMaster Magic, Pavarism has always been divided into complexity levels, spell levels. It's been a little streamlined in HMK, where there are 6. All the 208 spells in the book are of complexity level 1 through 6. It's not to say that there aren't higher complexity levels, but those are very legendary. And so some of the spells that you would find in HMG as being, level 8, everything's been focused to 1 through 6 levels. And then you just purchase your spells. Oh, This, and it's according to what your convocation is. And you spend, and there's another little mechanic that allows you to purchase with your arcane research points already enchanted magic items. Magic item enchantment is rare in Pavarism. In the game, it's hard. It's hard to do. It takes a long time. But since I really wanted to encourage players to be able to play old and experienced, powerful Czech Pavar, I wanted a way to easily, if that's the word, certainly harmoniously have them already acquired a character gen. You're not going to start with a bandolier of wands. This isn't. But as an old
There's
Czech
an image for
Bavar,
you, though.
yeah, right. As an old Czech Bavar, it's costly, but you'll likely start with what's called a focus and this sort of thing. So all that is, I guess that's the long way of answering your question. A character gen, and later on in the game, Pavaric magic is funneled through this single skill called Pavarism. And as a quick shout out to veteran players, some editions improve spell casting spell by spell. You can do that. Some editions do it per convocation. These six different, I guess you could call them schools, but this again should be maybe saved for an entire discussion of Pavarism. But approaches, and then HMK also has the core approach is that your spellcasting improves through your Pavarism ML, and when that improves, all your spellcasting improves. So you can really dial in whatever level of detail you prefer, and whatever system speaks, to your vision of what's going on in world. So I guess that the first advice for a Pavaric campaign would be to embrace the spells that are in the book, the 208, and just select them through these points. Now, if along the way you want to tweak a spell, you'll start to get a feel for the complexity levels and what would be considered. I say this in the book. I think ultimately spell creation as a game endeavor is game art and not game science. And I think that's how it should be. But maybe other games have perfected this highly quantified way of, having a range of X equals 10 points and this sort of thing. And you could probably devise something along those lines. I prefer to embrace the 200 spells as your spells, and then along the way during the campaign, with that said, it is easier, or I don't know if it's easier, but the spell research rules do allow you to sort of come up with these spell ideas and then research them for a month or two. And in fact, some of the new spells that have appeared in the book were the result of my own players or over the years devising new Pavaric spells. And there's maybe 2 or 3 that made it into the game in this way that are new. But I think that's that's maybe my second bit of advice is one way to get into absolute spell creation as a player is maybe let it happen naturally during the campaign. There might be a story, a narrative that, well, it'd be nice if this kind of spell existed. And in that sense, I think it's very much in the flavor of the world for your Czech Bavar character to go off to their studies. And it does take time to come up with this. So that would be my main advice to running a Pavaric campaign.
Yeah, because we didn't get to touch on that. So I appreciate being able to add a little flavor to that here.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we got us a yeoman archer. So.
Yeah, we got a yeoman archer, but let's look at just 3, even his humble ML, 12, 13 ritual and peony ritual. There are a couple of things you need to fill out on your character sheet. And this is at the top in the middle column. There's right below where the fate roll is and such. Oh, actually, that's we're not done with the arcane mysteries, are we? Because actually step 14, going back to page 53, says that you now can record 5 starting fate points, which I think you already did last session because I mentioned it.
You
So in the
mentioned it, and I popped it in there.
you popped it
So
in. Okay, to the left of where you entered in 5 is what's called the fate roll ML, and this is derived from your aura. So a
okay.
fate roll is essentially a 50-50 dice roll that's modified, and this is a new game term. It's called secondary modifier. That's in the skills chapter. I'm not going to go too far into that. But if you look at the upper right hand corner of page 53, you would look up your aura score, which I think was a 15, if I remember correctly.
My aura score is a 15. Yes.
Okay. So this table tells you that your fate roll ML, your basic fate roll, is a 60. So it's a little bit more than, because your aura represents your connection to Celestia, which is the all-encompassing reality, the cosmos, the future and the past. So you're in tune with this fate roll, a higher aura, and so this is what makes having a high aura desirable for a non-spellcaster, or a
Mhm.
non arcane practitioner, that it help, in a game term, it helps you with your fate roll. So to the left of where you wrote 5 fate points, you're going to write a 60, and that's treated just like a percentile test roll. And we did an example, I think, last session, so that whenever you want to make a fate roll on a mundane skill, mundane meaning a non-esoteric skill, one from nature, you'll be going for a 60, but then you modify it by the sun sign modifier. You had -10 in social and -10 in nature. You had plus
Yep.
10 in physical, right? So the skill test that you're trying to improve uh, lends the sun sign modifier of the category to which it belongs. So when you make a swimming test, I think you have a 20 something, so you fail. Well, I want to try to make a fate roll on swimming. Well, you would look to the 60, you would look to your sun sign bonus, I think is a plus 10, because
Yep.
swimming is part of physical. So your fate roll is a 70. So you have a 70% chance of succeeding on the fate roll. When you succeed on the fate roll, that you raise the core result is that you raise the success level 1. So that failure would become a success. And just to follow, and it would cost you 1 fate point. So your 5
Okay.
would go to a 4. Just to let people know, if you fail that fate roll, you don't get another chance. So this is where I think in some veteran players' minds, fate rolls might be anathema to the grittiness of Harn World. You're supposed to die from every G4 arm injury and this sort of thing. It's the way it is. And I think to some extent it needs to remain gritty. You could ignore fate rolls, although the new skills of astrology, tarot tree, the new qualified skills of tarot tree and such function through these fate rolls. You visit an astrologer to replenish your fate points, this sort of thing. On the other hand, I do strongly, well, I don't know if I'd say strongly, I usually don't like overpowered fate points. There's a couple of games where you start with 1 or 2 fate points, and each fate point means you don't die. So that if you fall off a cliff, it's a complete um, without any chance, you automatically get to spend 1 fate point and you're not dead. Well, to me, that makes every battle then almost inconsequential, or there's certainly less risk. So, as we sort of enumerated in the fate roll, you can fail the fate roll and you got to move on, and then you would accept the original. So that's one way that I think the fate roll is not overpowered and is not harmonious with the
What's the
vibe of the world.
what's the replenishment rule on that?
Well, the
Or is there?
replenishment rule is at the end of each session or each narrative arc, you do make a roll, a D10 roll. Let's look at that. If you start off with 5 fate, If you spent one to save yourself from drowning, that you had a 70% chance of doing so. Let's say you succeeded on that, you would have been reduced to 4. Now, at the end of the game session or maybe the narrative arc, um, you would roll a d10, and if you roll higher than your current fate point total, if you rolled a 5 or more, you would receive 1 fate point.
Got it.
So it's this idea that you can burn through them. And this is where game masters and gaming groups will have to dial in what feels right to them. It's not dissimilar to players of Call of Cthulhu mechanically, right?
Yeah, it's the luck
Yeah,
mechanic.
the luck mechanic, but then also the replenishing. That was just a unabashed fan of Call of Cthulhu, right? And one of the most brilliant game mechanics of all time is the sanity, right? And so your sanity can be replenished at the end. And
Hmm.
this is another thing the game master might award a fate point just at the end of a series of 3 sessions. You could
Yeah, I
approach
mean,
it that way. Yeah,
the nice thing about it is if you blow through several fate points, you're probably not replenishing all of them, right?
that's
You're
right.
you're just getting the one. So,
You're
you
more
know,
likely to get at least one back, but you'll still be low. And I think through playtests, and I'm telling you, I've playtested this, I'd say for a decade. I've been playing it even before the concept of HMK on this exact approach, using this exact mechanic. And the fact that they aren't complete saviors is its first balancing factor. The second, that you have to make the roll, and so you can fail, even in that it makes it risky. And then they ended up being the avenue for really exploring quantitatively in the game mechanics a way to manifest astrology, tarot tree, runecraft. It's never, and there's been no canon version of HarnMaster that has done that. Astrology's been a skill on the sheet for 40 years, but it's just been, there's been extensive articles on certainly astronomy and sort of nods to maybe what astrology could be. I've always been dissatisfied with the answer that somehow astrology and tarot tree need to be narrative based. I mean, they should, and visits, dramatic visits to the weird astrologer in the tower. You can still insert narrative role play to maybe what the astrologer tells you. But it's as simple as it's always needed game mechanics. Yeah, I don't know. It's not a complete. Yeah, it's as simple as that. So, fate roll is an important new mechanic, and I encourage people to explore it and tweak it down if it's offending your desire to die at every turn. Then reduce the number. That's as simple as that. Maybe every session you only get 1 fate point. Um,
yeah, I mean, you could change that up so, hey, you have a cap of like 3 fate points and you roll a
right.
d6 rather than a
Yes.
d10 or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's
That's
a
a good
number of
point.
ways a DM could
Hmm.
tweak that so that it doesn't, you're not negating every failed roll,
Right.
right?
Right. And I'm also as a game designer, there's no need to give NPCs fate points. And that's not discordant. You can assume that the role of the game master is their fated role.
Hmm.
I mean, you might want to give major NPCs fate rolls. I don't think you need to do that. And I don't. So fate rolls, fate points. Now, but that's kind of an important. So NPCs are still visiting astrologers, right, to get
Mm,
their epic futures told. And behind the screen, they're receiving fate points. They're behind the veil of the game, but there's no need to quantify that and
right.
give your big bad villain 6 fate points. Just assume that the dice rolls of the game master are the fated rolls. And that's another thing I want to point out. When you do succeed your swimming test, boy, this is going to be a 3-hour video. I think we're into it. Because this is a great. Where was I? Oh, that So your swimming test that you failed and you just fated and successfully, you burn a fate point, you're at 4. Now your failed swimming test goes to a success. Okay, so you cross the creek or the river.
Doesn't
The,
necessarily
the
mean that it goes swimmingly, so to
That's
speak,
right. It
right?
doesn't go swimmingly. And the two things I want to point out is in the world, your character always succeeded on the swimming test. This isn't a and we can get into discussing 7th edition Call of Cthulhu if they want us to. I'm not a fan of the trade-off. That something bad has to happen down the line because you've chosen, and that's a subjective game design and gameplay feel. I think it makes more work for the game master. It's it's punishing the player for a mechanic that was supposed to be a boon. Some people see that as a nice balancing factor. I see it as confusion, more work for everyone. So what I want to point out, at least as written, a successful fate roll doesn't mean you were failing. That there
Mm.
was some divine intervention, certainly not that, but some sort of intervention that turned your failure into a success. No, that's the game mechanic implies that it was always a success because of your
It was
successful
destined
fate
to
roll.
be a success.
Destined. And if you had failed it, of course, it was destined to be a failure. And so I think that's an important narrative distinction to make or description to share is that these fate rolls aren't changing reality. They were always already the reality uh,
Mm.
for that character. So, and
Yeah, that
it's
is a
also
big difference from the Call of Cthulhu luck mechanic, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah. I play 6th edition, or I guess 5th edition is my favorite in terms of page layout of Call of Cthulhu. But yeah, I guess I don't mind the luck, the new 7th edition luck mechanic. I don't like the threat meter uh, punishment. Look, the game master's job is one already busy enough, but to always have to come up with these down the road punishments or is but here's the other thing, the game master is already doing that. That's another veer, game design veer. I'm not a big fan of role playing threat meters. I like it in my pandemic game and all that sort of thing, right? Your board games where the threat meter increases, but for a role playing game I don't think a threat meter is needed. That's called the game master. The game master
mhm.
is the threat meter. um, and can raise it and lower it whenever they want. This has been going on for 50 years in the game. There's no need to quantify that aspect. In fact, quantifying it muddles some of the elegance of the communicative, imaginative exchange that goes on at the table. Doesn't need to be quantified. But that's a rant. So let's see. Let's keep moving. Let's go back to the ritual. Your humble ritual skill. You're gonna
Yeah. Okay. Character sheet. Here we go.
and this gives advice essentially on and we're focusing. It's nice that we're having a nice traditional Harn based campaign. uh, we're determining your church status. Now some of this is all of this is to be filtered through the player's own desires for the most part, but as the rules are written, you're part of the laity of the Paoni church because your ritual is at least a 1. um, in following HarnMaster Gold, there's a concept of a circle of power that as laities don't have circles of power. You're zero circle. If you joined a fighting order, if you joined a clergy, the clergy, an alkalite would be circle 1. An ordained priest is circle 3, and it's roughly it's 1 to 7 uh, clerical circles of power. But as the laity, you do not have a circle of power. So there's no necessary. But what it does tell you in that 4th column, where I jumped to page 55, and there's a church status section. Since you're part of the laity, you're with a ritual 1 or more, you may attend what are called low ceremonies.
Hmm.
It's kind of the mass, run-of-the-mill monthly ceremony. And peony has a very specifically named low ceremony, and you could turn to that section in the mysteries, and maybe that would be part of a mysteries video where we look at some of the low and mid and high ceremonies and what that means. But for now, um, we would, as far as character gen, we'd go to the next section called other religious characteristics, and you compute these characteristics for all characters that have a ritual ML. There's something called a blessing bonus, and you're considered, it's a game term, but it's also in world, I suppose. You're considered a follower of Peony. Something
Mm-hmm.
to point out with the Western Venerian pantheon, um, is that you likely, very likely, believe in all 10 gods, and you probably offer informal prayers to all of them. Even though the god of death and chaos is Morgoth, the people of the countryside might give a slight nod to Morgoth if a relative dies, or there can be so in this pantheon, these groups of gods, um, in terms of the world and in terms of role playing, it's you don't disbelieve in the other nine. In fact, probably believe in all of them. But in game terms, having a ritual ML means that you specifically follow this one. You could have started a separate ritual ML. Your morality and outlook can affect the efficacy or the impact of that ritual ML in game. But you have one ritual ML in the Peony religion. Um, Followers begin with a blessing bonus equal to your, here's an introduction of a new term, ritual index. Index is the ML divided by 10, rounded down.
Mm-hmm.
So your
Yep.
ritual, you have an index of 1. So your blessing bonus is a 2. And so you would write that in to the character sheet section, the blessing. You would write a +2. Um, if
So wait, sorry. It's the index rounded down, which is going to be a 1, and then we're getting the additional 1 from the
that's
ritual ML of laity.
you know what? Yeah, I'm on page 55 in the other religious characteristics section. The first
Yep.
bold point is called the
Index
blessing
plus
bonus,
1.
and it
Got it.
simply tells you that it's ritual index +1.
Okay. Cool. So yeah, so
It
we've got a +2 over there.
and that +2 is on the ML scale. So you have a +2 on a 1 to 100 scale, but a +2 in what? Uh, you also have another characteristic that has existed in previous editions called piety. For veteran gamers, the HMK piety is almost on an index scale. It was essentially on a 1 to 100 scale in previous editions, where you could accumulate 20 and 30 and it would go down, or you could have 60 or 70. Um, for simplification purposes, I've kind of rounded it all by 10. So piety is a more narrow quantitative, has a amount. Followers start with what's called a maximum piety, equal to your circle, which for you is a 0. You have no circle, +1. So your run-of-the-mill character has 1 piety point, and so all you need now is just to yeah, you recorded it. That's right over there. Uh, okay, then you have what's called doctrinal subjects for each religion, and your blessing bonus, which is a +2, applies to a number of doctrinal skills equal to your maximum piety. So for you, a very humble character, you're going to get a +2 bonus to 1 doctrinal skill. And you would find out what your doctrinal skills are by finding the peony entry in the Divine Mysteries, which West you can. I'm using my indexed PDF, and I have found Peony on page, what is that, 335. And this is where this is a one-page description of various aspects of the Church of Peony, background.
Mm-hmm.
This is all canon references, the church, belief, sacred ground. Um, you can see in the upper right-hand corner, it lists the various circles that are particular to the Church of Peony. And it even gives you in-world linguistic descriptions, what a temple priest is called within the church. Of course, you aren't of the clergy. So you would go down in that sidebar to doctrine. And we just said that you have one doctrinal skill. When you attend a ceremony, and there's specific dates of these ceremonies, and these descriptions are on the following page. We also found out that you may attend low ceremonies. So in selecting a doctrinal subject, you would do this each time you go to one, each monthly visit to the ceremony. You could select from the skills of the low ceremony, because we found that on the church status table back in the character gen chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that these doctrinal skills are not surprisingly related to the liturgy of the Church of Peony: agriculture, animal craft. There's something called a physical recovery role, which is what many is almost a default choice. When you're injured or this sort of thing, you would receive a bonus to the recovery rolls. So starting off, to get the campaign rolling, I would ask the player to select one of those three roles as your doctrinal subject, the one that you get. Do you can almost imagine that you attended a ceremony this past month, and game
Mm-hmm.
masters can make it flavorful if they want, that when you attended, maybe that particular day of worship was on agriculture, and would assign you this bonus. For now, I'm going to let you choose as a player. Yeah, and so do you. It's obviously a humble bonus, but it would
Yeah,
apply
so
to
it's +1. Is that what it
plus
ends up
two.
being? +2.
It's equal to your blessing bonus, which
Got
is
it. So we'll go with the tried and true physical recovery rolls.
okay. So that completes your divine mysteries preparation for the game. As a player, you'd want to visit this page and you could read through this. And
Yeah.
we've kind of
I could make the case for agriculture being kind of
sure.
peasant farmer
Mm-hmm.
yeoman type thing, but because we've gone more fighter, we're going to go with physical recovery.
Yeah, yeah, and you can, yeah, players will recognize that the higher circle, like a Circle 3 priest PC, will likely have 4 or 5 doctrinal subjects, and they'll be able to select from both low and high doctrine.
Hmm.
So that's the advantage of entering the clergy and exploring your faith more deeply, is being able to attend higher ceremonies and having a broader range of doctrine that can affect your life and your faith, this sort of thing. So that's I think that might be the end of step 14, which was one of our goals for this follow-up video. Let's go back to that. We were on the religion and priest characters page. Yeah, that's right. Morality. I'll call this out. Page 55 at the bottom. Morality is quantified, and it has real effect in the world, aside from how you role play your character. That each religion expresses what's called an orthodox range of morality. For Peony followers, it's between 8 and 18. You can have ritual ML 90 and have a morality of 4. Maybe you're an
Mm,
evil or a troublesome scholar who happens to know a lot about the Paoni religion. Um, but your divergent morality lowers the effect of some of these 3 previous uh, game characteristics. So the major couple of major things to realize about the divine mysteries, some of which are newly emphasized in HMK, but have always existed in various articles, uh, is that the gods, in a sense, are real, but they do not. They certainly don't. It's more harmonious to various canon texts, in my view, that they don't function similarly to D&D
right.
priests. It's certainly not magic. What priests do is not. I think in D&D in all editions, it overtly says that magic is magic, but you have different approaches to it. So the magic user in D&D casts a spell, as does a cleric. They are casting divine magic. That's not the flavor uh, as described in canon texts that date back over 40 years. And this will, we can, I'll dip into it a little bit here. Uh, but there are texts, certainly the most recent of Crosby's in On Divinity, that allude to um, in-world realities that express a different approach to to how priest characters are interacting with the reality. And so, in this sense, morality, is a real thing. So it's not that the major difference is that a Shekpavar can expressly define beforehand how they want to alter reality.
Mm,
I channel ethereal energy and I create fire. They have dictated how the change to reality will take place. The divine mysteries, specifically the priest prayer and the blessing in these doctrines, and even with being in a state of grace, which is a parallel game mechanic than the blessing bonus piety doctrinal subject, the ritual skill. Not even with miracles can the call for miracles precisely dictate how the miracle manifests. It's 100% up to the greater being. And so this is one more reason why priestly characters in Harn World cannot conjure up ethereal fire in the same way that a Shekpavar can. They can't dictate. Now, you could dial that, and there's for various reasons. There's something called a concordant that the gods agreed upon a list of, and I touch upon, well, no, touch, I actually, these are listed in HMK explaining why this is so.
Yeah,
And game,
the
yeah,
descriptor is pretty thorough on that. It's kind of
right.
foundational reading for
Yeah,
anyone
it
that's
is
going to run the setting.
foundational. Um, contentious, I would say, among a lot of Harn players, and you can
Oh,
certainly
really? Okay.
you can dial that up. Um, my what I view as being more harmonious with canon texts on how the divine mystery should manifest on Kethira. You can certainly run it more along the lines of D&D clerics,
Mm,
and you can have your clerics conjuring up fire. And in fact, there's so, but this is I think this is a change even to. It's interesting. Crosby has conflicting canonical descriptions of it. I would say in On Divinity, he's pointing to this more, um, and then HMK embraces that and dials down the D&D type approach to divine spell casting. Um, so I guess I guess my tangent on that, which we can explore more in another video, is that I wanted to make the point Some people come to the HMK upon first reading and think, well, the gods don't exist. Well, no, they do. It's just that they cannot be demanded to manifest miracles according to the faithful's vision. It just doesn't work that way. So that when you are in a state of grace and you invoke, say, a grace point, it will manifest almost entirely mundanely, and it'll almost always seem like just good luck.
Mm-hmm.
The example I use in the book is that if you want to remove 3 tons of earth to escape from from inside a cave that has collapsed, that's a Shekbavar spell. But if you want to invoke grace and spend a point of grace in the game to escape the same cave, that would likely manifest as a discovered secret passage that you didn't know existed that suddenly presents itself. Not out of the blue. It's mundanely there, So
I swear I checked that wall 5 times.
Could have sworn. So that would be an example of how a miracle manifests in HMK. Now, it offers borderline cases that are described as uncanny miracles that might stretch credulity, that might seem a little bit more than simply good luck. And that's where game masters and gaming groups can come in and dial that up or down as much as they want. So that's the end of step 14.
Okay. So that is, as far as the generation steps that are outlined, everything for character creation. But we have a couple tables in the index that we wanted to run through under character detail.
Character detail. And there's a fairly clear shout out for those details that will send you there from the character chapter. These aren't hidden for some reason. So yeah, let's roll through these. We looked at this last session, page 427, appendix 3. And let's do all of these. Let's start with appearance. And you can select any of these. But knowing you will roll randomly. So the first character trait is complexion. You look up the region of your birth, which is Harn, and of course that implies a certain level of latitude on the globe. Described broadly as mid latitude. So you would go to the table below, 3rd column over the mid column, and you're going to roll percentile, and it'll generate. There's basically 5 complexions, very light to very dark.
34.
34.
Yep.
So you're right in the middle. Medium complected.
Right.
And then even that's a fairly broad term. You can describe it however you want. Hair color is based upon the complexion you just rolled.
So we got medium. Let's go ahead and see. 82.
82. Blonde hair.
All right.
And then your eye color is also based upon complexion. So medium.
It's going to be medium again. 92.
92. Gray eyes.
All right. We get into the build.
Okay. And veteran players will notice that you generate a difference from all previous editions. You generate your strength first, and then you randomly determine your overall height and weight from that strength number. I've at the bottom of page 428, I mention a little bit why this is, or at least, but it gives you 6 with each strength. You have a strength of 16, I believe. Just
Let's
as a
go
side
back
note.
to the chart.
Oh yes,
Yes, 16.
sorry, 428. So roll percent. You'll be between 6 feet tall and 6'5". I
Yep.
do. This is where game masters might want to broaden each strength section to more than just 6 rows. You might, if I had room, I might have included 8, right, instead of 6. But
Okay.
this is to imply more realistically that a strength of 16 means you're within a certain range of size. Um, and so we roll that randomly.
You see
Or
that on the screen?
oh, I didn't. What is it? 100?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So yeah, you are 77 inches tall, 6'5". And I kind of
Yeah.
glossed over this section. There's a build section on page 427 that takes you through the 4 steps. We just did steps 1 and 2. You found your strength in the subsection. You rolled percentile.
Yep.
Step 3, the character's height in inches is the first resulting number. So you are 70. You can, yeah, write 6'5" if you like. But you do want to remember 77 inches tall, because then what you do is you look up the 77 inches tall in the right hand column table on page 428. That very first
Okay.
column, you go all the way down, and 77 inches gives you a descriptive trait called great height. So
Yeah.
you can record both the literal dimension, but in world, she was very tall, he was very short. Well, your character is of great height. I like to. So yeah, one approach is not to even write down the exact inches. I'll let medieval historians correct me on whether such small increments were used in world or not, but at the very least, certainly the broad traits would. um So you would write down both 77 inches and great height. And then
Hmm.
from the 77 inches row, um, you would locate. Sorry, I kind of got ahead. If we go back to what your 100 roll in the 16 strength section, to the right of the 77 result is a number 200.
Yeah,
That's
right
a,
here.
yes, right there. The base weight is 200 pounds. But step 4 on the previous page says you add 3d6 pounds to this
Oh,
200.
all right. 7.
Okay, so you weigh 207 pounds.
All right.
And I think everyone's recognized over the years that the first edition of HarnMaster, Crosby referenced likely pre-1960 actuary tables of typical heights and weights. So some of these will seem odd to our, you know,
Modern eye.
modern heights and weights. But these two tables were generated entirely sort of retrofitted, I guess, or recast based upon the exact results of the HMG tables. And if you have HMG, or one day when you get it, you'll see the in previous editions you rolled your height and weight first, and then that would modify your strength. There are a couple errors I feel are that occur in that approach, and so this approach, in my mind, more realistically represents what the strength score is. So you would write down on you would look up 77 inches, and then you would cross over, um, and you would see that 208 pounds is in that next to the last column, and then you would go up to the top of that for your descriptor. So
Hmm.
you are of great height and heavy frame, and then also write down the literal numbers in case your
Yep.
friends start hauling you around. Uh,
Hopefully, it won't come to that.
right. Uh,
So we've got Sir Duncan the Tall here out
Yeah, it's
of
great. It goes, and yeah, he's a
Knight of
boy
the
that
Seven Kingdoms.
is that square jawed, comeliness 15 doesn't hurt.
No, yeah, I'm a hit when I stroll into Shaw there.
And you're also a nice guy, right? Or maybe your charm. Oh, one thing I want to
Oh,
point out, with
we
your,
didn't actually roll morality, did we?
yeah, we
Am
did. Oh
I-
yeah,
Did
you
we?
chose dutiful 11. Oh, when I said
Oh
nice
yeah.
guy, I was referring to your 70 charm skill. Which, by the way, people are wondering. There was a previous in
This
terms
is
of
our
the,
imitating life.
yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. You'll. It's not a stretch for you to role play this, so but maybe you can find some way to stretch the connection. There's a previous the social skill names have changed, but have not disappeared. The in earlier edition, there was a social type skill called Lovecraft. Uh, yeah, and think sort of the Arthurian
Hmm.
legends of and seduction. So charm ends up including this kind of a sub skill that could be this is something we didn't touch on in our character gen, but HMK offers a and encourages players to explore the concept of expertises. It was called specialization in previous editions and in other games. I think expertise, in my mind, is a more accurate description of what goes on, so that if you wanted to really be an expert in Lovecraft, in seduction, you could introduce the idea that after your charm was developed to skill multiple 5.
Mm.
Gaming groups can say, well, after the all these skills get to a skill multiple 4, let's say, you then have to choose expertise. you know or another approach is that you can choose expertises. My games, I don't use expertises. All these, so your charm skill covers not only the gift for chatting up the village elder, or chatting up people in the inn, but it also includes seduction, what was called Lovecraft. Some gaming
Yeah.
groups have a higher desire for these various expertises and just more finely tuning the various skills. And I think an obvious one that might end up being in the minority on is the melee skill. Um, is that gaming groups enjoy having the 8 different weapon groups, and that's very easy to do. Once your melee gets to level 3 or 4, you have to start choosing sword or axe. Um, and expertise is very easy to do. For this character gen, we didn't use expertises at all. Some skills don't even, I think initiative is already fairly specific, so probably wouldn't allow for expertises. But anyone who knows anything about these craft skills will tell you that metalwork probably quickly branches into various expertises. I think there can be an anachronistic modern day application and expectation of specialization that might not be appropriate. But I think it's easily arguable from a realism standpoint that uh, you probably should consider some level of specialization. I like it.
Yeah.
I don't know how heroic it makes characters in my games. It's more from just a focus of the character sheet. I get a little lost when there's too much information on a character sheet, and the basic HMK and any basic skill based game already has plenty going on the character sheet.
Well, I think
Uh,
going back to like that Czech
mhm.
Bavar game, if you've
Yeah,
got 4 or 5 players that are all playing Czech Bavar,
right.
maybe having that nuance is far more important. Or if you have
No,
5
it's
melee
true.
characters,
Yeah,
that's where your differences come into play.
it's good that you bring
Um,
that up. I mean, the Shepkavar skill, even the core skill, already has 6
mhm.
expertises called convocations. So you do, yeah, you're right. So Pavarism is one of the core skills that even in my games you have these convocational focusing. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see it in the melee stuff too. Like,
yeah. Hmm.
and I think if we have time, we'll still chat about weapons and stuff and
Oh
armor.
yeah, I do. I do want to
Um,
look at that. I think, yeah, I think weapon expertise probably the final argument is in terms of realism is definitely for some differentiation.
yeah,
Um,
one guy in my gaming group is a bladesmith,
yeah.
so he
Hmm.
gets way into it.
Yeah. Right.
You know,
I
he
think
knows
sometimes.
his stuff, so he's gonna call that out.
No, totally. The flaw of the previous HarnMaster approach in terms of these weapon groups is that you end up having unrealistic disparity. Look, if you've developed mastery in the sword to ML 90,
Hmm.
I don't care if you pick up a rock, it's not going to be much lower than 90. Like, even if you pick up a strange weapon or you improvise a weapon, it's not going to be much lower than 90. What took you to attain ML 90 in swordmanship translates.
Yeah, it's the
And
forms. It's not necessarily
yeah,
the
any
thing you're holding
martial
in your
artist will
hand.
tell you that. But so some of this now there are actual, obviously, veterans and martial artists in the gaming community who have strong opinions on this and likely can dial this in to satisfy their level of realism. Uh, but I would say expertises don't begin until after SM4. So that taking our, if you have let's take an ML 90 character who has an 18 skill base, right? They've developed it to the skill base to SM. So 5 times 18 is a 90. I would argue that there should be no weapon below the SM4 level for this particular fighter. There's nothing that they wouldn't pick up that would be below an ML72. And I find it unrealistic in previous editions where that's not the case. Where if they suddenly picked up an axe that they had never put points in, they would be at an ML36 or something. And the disparity between someone who has attained true ML90 level of fighting would never have an ML36 in any object. That's how strongly I feel about the expertise approach. But do recognize that my preference for just a single melee skill is likely not the most popular and maybe not the most realistic. But for character gen, I wanted just the basic melee skill to be developed. And then you can delve into how you want to dial in the expertises. So that's that. Um, okay. Where were we? We were in the back. You're tall. You're grand.
Yeah, I
You
think
have great
we
height and heavy
only
weight.
handedness to go.
Okay, let's do handedness. We're back to
So
page
handedness
427.
427. Designate the character's prime and offhand. Okay, so we are. Oh, what are we rolling here? Which includes a
Oh,
chance for.
sorry. I was lapsed into just letting you guide us or follow. Yeah, page 427, a percentile, and you look up your species,
Oh,
your folk, I should say, I guess,
yeah.
human.
No, I
Um,
saw enter in, and I was just like, oh, where's the human column? But it's one and the same. Survey says a 20, so that's going to be right-handed.
right-handed. Okay.
Yeah.
But if you want to be
There we go.
left-handed, you certainly can. Okay, so let's we scroll past the build table, page
Yeah.
429. We did siblings, and we've determined you have a middle sister still alive and a
Yep.
younger sister deceased. If you want to, this is a house rule, I guess, already. But if you were of mature age, 36, your parents would probably be around 60 at
Mm-hmm.
maybe even the oldest, maybe mid 60s. So they would be of the old age group. So you want to roll to, I guess, you could apply if you had mentioned maybe asking wanting to determine whether your parents were still alive. This might be an interesting wrinkle.
Yeah, we'll roll a d10. See,
So,
so +2 to the roll there,
oh, is
right?
that right? Where's the +2? Oh, that's relationship. Go back up to
Oh.
siblings. Again, I was
Oh, I see what
imagining
you're
you
doing.
could read my
Yeah.
mind. Uh, so I was going to roll on the siblings table for your parents to see if they're alive or dead. I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
40% chance they're alive, 60% that they're deceased. Given the fact that you're of mature age, I think that's
So
logical.
roll the father first.
Okay,
Okay, he's toast. That's a 10.
he's okay, which would make sense that you inherited the if your father was the yeoman, likely.
Ooh, my mother kicked it too.
Okay, so parents. Uh, so you have. I think that's a interesting narrative wrinkle.
Yep. So I'm unpopular with just my sister at this point in the
Wonder if they
family.
died the same day that your younger sister died. Now we're getting. Well, you are
Oh, I
depressed.
burned down the hut?
Yeah, maybe we should ask the living sister what happened. Maybe
Right?
she's the only one that knows. Uh, okay. The relationship has an intimate personal relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Uh, if you want
So
to
this
roll
is
on that.
just a straight roll
Hmm.
on a d10. That's a 5. Spouse with children.
Yeah. If that speaks to you, then
Yeah.
that's, yeah.
And then we're on
Ally or
to.
rival, again, obviously various other games have really mastered the idea of allies and rivals, Traveler, all
Mhm.
certainly the Mongoose recent edition. I really love how that works. This is a slight nod to that sort of thing. Um,
Well, just it adds some flavor to the town, right? Like
yeah, yeah,
your campaign may
uh,
not be set there, but if you pass through, it's like, oh,
right, right. And, yeah. So I do think, broadly speaking, again, another game design opinion. I do believe that fewer traits and characteristics like this go a longer way than a litany of intricate. I don't know. There's something about having 10 personality traits or even five that it's hard for me to end up even imagining who that is. But, we know that you're moderately dutiful.
mm-hmm.
You're depressed that we've attached. It sounds like you're attaching it to something to do with your family growing up or recently. And then the third one is you're unfocused, which,
Yep.
yeah, is interesting and could even be there's a story right there, right? Those three characteristics. And, I feel like once you start getting beyond, the 2 to 4 range of quantified traits, but you and I off camera have discussed at length the genius of Pendragon. And, I understand that. In one of my slight, dare I say, criticisms of sometimes the litany of traits is muddied, even for a Hall of Fame game like Pendragon. But slide aside. But let's roll a rival, an ally or rival. So roll d10. Let's see how it works.
Let's see what we get. We got 5, so there's none.
There's none. Okay.
Okay.
Unless you want one, right? All of this is optional. Occupation status is, yeah. You pick, or through the game master's advice, a, a primary skill, which I think probably initiative for you, because we're saying that you're either a yeoman archer or a recently successful mercenary.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you're making this is kind of a nice game mechanic lesson, your what's called success value test. So let's look at your initiative skill. Um,
Sure. So we're looking at an initiative ML of 65 with a
okay,
plus
so
10 from Sunsign.
okay, we're not going to reference the plus 10 for now. You're going to make a percentile roll against the 65. And if you get a 65 or lower, it's a success.
Ooh, 77.
Okay, so that's a simple failure. There's 4 levels of success, success and failure. And then if the second die roll ended in a 5 or a 0, it would be a critical of
Mm-hmm.
said version. So you get critical success, critical failure, or failure, critical failure. So that was a simple failure. As you can find out when you look up what a success value test is, failing it generates a -1. And you subtract that from the skill index, the index of the skill you just tested. So the index of a 65, do you recall what that would be?
Oh yeah, it's going to be a 6.
It'd be a 6. Okay. So with the -1, that 6 becomes a 5. That is called a success value 5. Um, and in this instance, we're looking at a specific table at the top of page 429. And your stat, oh, there's one more modifier to this occupation status. So keep in mind the number 5. You
Okay.
further modify this success value um, by an intrigue test. So your intrigue, I think, is a 36.
My intrigue survey says 36.
Okay. Make a success test against the 36.
No,
No.
66.
Okay, so that's a failure. And if we looked at the end of that first paragraph, such an intrigue test failure further reduces that initial success value, which had ended at a 5. So now it's a 4. Have I confused
Unpopular.
you how I arrived, or is that
Nope, I'm following.
okay?
We've got that in here. So we get the
Oh,
intrigue test. We've
here's
got the
another.
initiative test.
Yeah, here's another live, uh, which is always fun to see. A typo.
Oh,
Yes, at that in the top right table, the success value, the first column, the first row is less than or equal
oh,
to 2. The
5
second,
twice.
yeah, should be a 3 or a 4.
Yep.
So that'll go to the accumulating errata sheet. So you have an unpopular status in your profession, which I got to tell you plays into exactly what you had already narratively decided. To a certain extent, right? You were saying you were once a yeoman archer. Now you could apply this to your current, but actually, I guess if we were kind of going by, it feels like it applies to the occupational status that you wrote down, and we're sort of, but it's up for
Mm-hmm.
you to decide. But to me, it narratively fits in to your unpopular status as a yeoman archer, maybe.
I
But
think so.
yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I pieced out, took the payday, and everyone holds it against me.
Yeah. Okay, let's do this. This is a little travel backstory detail. You know how far, and it's been dialed in to the classic. Rural people didn't travel as much. It's arguable. Whether it was beyond the village they grew up in is probably exaggerated, but not greatly. Again, I'll leave that to. This is based upon that broad assumption, but you have various modifiers. It's a straight D10 roll. You're not elven or dwarven. You're neither young or old. You're of the free class, and you see where
Mm-hmm.
the tables I'm looking at gives you a -1. You have a
Yep.
rural background, -2 for a -3. You don't. These specific occupations obviously would carry you abroad. Game masters can tweak and expand this if they want. These are some basic occupation models. So you have from my calculation, you have a -3 on this
That's what I'm
D10
seeing.
roll.
Yeah. I might be functioning as a mercenary currently, but that is not my occupation, and that might even be a new thing. I might have
Oh,
just done that.
you're right. You're right. That's a good point.
So I'm gonna roll a d10. We have a 5.
Okay, so you would subtract the -3. So
Yep,
the
so
travel extent is home. Not you haven't gone much beyond the character's birthplace. In feudal realms, you know, a league, couple of miles, maybe further.
yeah,
Um,
and off camera we decided Nenda in Caldor.
we
Was
did, and the kind of place that this role kind of plays into where I had placed you, and we're going to get to that eventually. So Any of these details would probably be written down in the notes section. There's no
Just
formal.
drop
Yeah.
my percentile. Hang on. Victory.
Okay. So yeah, we are. Wow. Yeah, we're
Yes, we haven't traveled far,
okay. Let's. There's a
or
couple more
really never
elements.
having traveled.
Yeah, yeah. You really never had traveled far. Um, okay. So those are the character details. Um, and that would bring the character chapter to an end. Uh, what we would do, and we can do quickly, remembering your 1,000 pennies worth of
Mm-hmm.
possessions that you're needing to acquire. We're not going to go through backpack level detail on this. I want to show, and you can peruse the armor suits. This is what I encourage new gamers to do is on page 112 is a discussion of these armor suits because HarnMaster has these 15 hit locations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you would just go through here. No, social status is quite important. You're a freeman, so obviously on page 113 would likely be well, yeah, anyone could wear clothing, heavy clothing. I mentioned the quilted coat, and the suits are named after the most prominent single article. Um, and you can see the 6 or 7 articles that truly make up this particular suit. As a yeoman archer, you probably if we start scrolling down to page 114, they quickly go up in price. I mean, look at the scale Byrne, the male Byrne is 800. And
Yeah.
that would mark you're technically of the military class to a certain extent. So it wouldn't be completely out of the ordinary that you might be wearing a male Byrne. Um,
If I also
but
abandon my farm, this might also be the only thing I really have to my name.
that's right. Yeah, yeah, that's true. So what's interesting, you definitely will be able to afford the quilted coat, and then all that you would do on page 2 of your character sheet is you'd want to make note of the price. And you don't necessarily have to choose. If we indeed start to play with this character, you might be able to afford the male Byrne, and would take up most. But you'll also see the expense of the various weapons. Um, the thing that you would, for our purposes and our demonstration purposes, even the quilted coat carries an encumbrance of 5, and the encumbrance rules have been funneled and streamlined to where these suits just have a general encumbrance number that are based upon the individual articles. And so
Mm-hmm.
in HMK, it's a little bit easier. Like if you suddenly donned a male Byrne, that would bring an additional encumbrance of 5. There's various reasons why using a strict encumbrance system based upon the weight of the item are there are various reasons why that's unrealistic, and it has to do with the center of gravity, where it's located, this sort of thing. And so in some ways, assigning an encumbrance value, which is a penalty, a -5 to agility test, is actually not only simpler but more realistic. Um, and
So
so,
point of clarification.
yeah, sure.
So we're talking about the kit, but if you were looking at encumbrance or you were piecing this together, or over
Yeah,
time you've modified each individual piece,
right.
um, is
Whereas,
this encumbrance number just talking about this main piece here, or is
what's
it?
interesting, yeah, let me scroll down to page 118.
Yeah, let
Um,
me get there.
this is
There
where
we
you
go.
can dive in and you've become a true Harniac when you are late at night uh, mastering this table. Because this is where you choose each article of clothing piece by piece and you piece it all together. So the quilted coat that we just looked at is made by those 6 or 7 articles that appear on this page. And I wanted to show you, yeah, on page 118, if you look in and there are, what are there, 8 or 10 different types of articles: cloth, leather, padded, quilted. And these are, you can find where these definitions are displayed of exactly what do I mean by quilted. Um, but notice that in the quilted section, the third row from the bottom is the quilted coat. And if it gives the price, which is 256. So that's it's over half of that
Mm-hmm.
400 penny price. There's an actual weight. If you were carrying around this quilted coat, it would weigh 11.5 pounds. But then the fourth column is the encumbrance. And notice that there's a 5 in it.
Yep.
That's actually where ultimately the quilted suits 5 encumbrance comes from. Because if you looked up the other 6 articles of clothing that are in that suit, the encumbrance column would not have an encumbrance entry. So underneath the quilted suit, behind the curtain, you know that the quilted coat is what is contributing the 5 encumbrance. So what happens, if, and we can get into what can be layered on top of what. Technically, the quilted coat is already pretty thick enough, but if you looking on this article table on page 118, what it means is if you took off the quilted coat, then the 5 encumbrance would go away. And you'd be left with, what is it, a cloth tunic underneath it or whatever the suit says. And let's say then you put on a sleeved male byrnie. In your first battle, you defeated someone wearing a sleeved male byrnie. Well, then you would go the game master, or you would go to this table, and you would look in the male section over in the right side of the page, and about halfway down that section, indeed, there's something called a sleeved byrnie. But notice its
Mm-hmm.
encumbrance is a 10. And so you've basically traded out your quilted coat, which has an encumbrance of 5, and you would replace that. You'd have to refigure the numbers and this sort of thing. But in terms of encumbrance, you would basically replace it with a 10. And so that's about as much as I wanted to point out concerning, these suits and these articles. There is let's go back to the quilted coat, which I've kind of, again, in the way apparently I've elbowed you into a quilted coat for now, for playtest purposes.
No, I mean, I think that makes sense as an archer. Like,
Okay,
I got to have some degree of mobility, right?
right. And I'll let you know. Well, actually, we can look
It's
right
still
now.
400 coins.
It's
So,
only 400 of your 1,000. Yeah, you might just purchase a male byrnie and have it rolled up, in your belongings. We'll see. Actually, this is a good time if you go up to page 112, which is just at the start of the armor suits section. You'll see in that bottom shaded section, armor suit entries, there's something called an encumbrance strength modifier, and you simply look up your strength in that table. You have a 16. And in the next column, it says -15. The -15 is a good thing because that means you reduce those encumbrance numbers by that amount,
oh,
down to
okay.
a minimum 0. So yeah, your strong back can carry quite the burden. So that 5 encumbrance that showed up in the quilted suit is ignored, right? Because the -15 soaks it up. Now, when you start donning, or carrying other gear, backpack, this sort of thing, there's a simple way. It's done in quantities of 5. But with this -15 modifier, you can not only uh, don this quilted suit without any penalty, but likely a fairly full backpack. And maybe even other camping gear. So now I'm starting to see why maybe the other player characters agreed that you join the party because you'll be carrying around their stuff, their gear. But and the last thing I'll point out that's a special new rule, and we can stay on this page 112, is what's called the area armor value. And for you, it actually is what's called an F4. The F refers to fire or frost. And this is on the second page of the character sheet. So what would happen? You would enter in those various armor values
Yep.
on the second page. And at the very bottom, below your foot location, all the way to the right, is a place to enter in a new piece of data in HarnMaster, and it's called your area armor value. And this is HarnMaster has handled, if at all, the idea of area weapons. One that comes to mind, of course, is the fire breath weapon of a dragon. And dragons do exist on Kethira. They're quite powerful and rare, luckily. But it could also be the fire of a spell, or maybe just a cottage that has been engulfed in fire. How do you damage? How is damage inflicted in a system that otherwise so discreetly determines? And this is not just a simplification to make it easier, but it's more realistic in how. So this fire, and it literally is a mathematical quantification of the fourth armor value column in your quilted coat sheet. You have the F column. So what has happened? Yeah, the math is already done for you in determining the area. So if you're caught in a fire in a building at an inn, it's been determined, if you look over there, that your area fire armor value is a 4. And we can do some combat playtesting of that.
Yeah, it would be fun.
Because the location system works best when the trauma is specifically delivered to your elbow, to your thorax, to your skull, to your foot. But not all trauma is delivered that discreetly. In fact, as we know, fire damage, the trauma of fire damage has mostly to do with the percentage of your body, of your skin, the skin organ, how much has been burnt. And it's not strictly wear, although that can make a slight, in terms of absolute realism. I suppose it's more traumatic that you've suffered deep fires to your chest as opposed to your elbow. But generally speaking, there is this, trauma from fire. The shock of trauma is the sudden, dehydration that takes place, this sort of thing. So there is a realistic argument for an overall armor value, especially when it comes to deflecting fire impact. I'm sorry, go ahead.
In entering this.
Oh, is it not?
No, I just
a flaw. There could be.
Copied it wrong.
Oh, okay. So yeah,
actually, I'm gonna pause the recording for 1 second. I'm gonna enter these so we can see it finish.
Okay.
So hang on. All right. So we have that entered here.
Great. That's exactly right. You've in the armor suits, we use those, the page display shows the bullet points when there's no armor value, but you can certainly write it as 0 also. And then the other thing I want to point out, readers or viewers are noticing that in the skull entries for edge and piercing, that the 8 and the 6 are in a square, and that refers to the kerbul, or the hardened leather helm. And there's a rigid armor rule, and the square means the rigid armor rule applies. Now, in terms of your character sheet, you would just maybe write an asterisk, or just remember, that it's a rigid armor when an edge or a piercing weapon strike it. I think there's just enough room in the fillable sheet where you could put an asterisk after the 8 and the 6. And the other thing I want to point out about these 12 armor suits is, and this is obvious, and it has existed in previous editions, but when game masters are introducing these non-player characters, obviously you just want to defer to some of these suits.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the clothing suit could cover. Now, for I think we're going to obviously produce. There's more various suits that you would come across. I think there's a need for maybe a fully robed and cloaked, scholar type, and this sort of thing. But you can devise your own suits. But otherwise, just default to whatever seems appropriate, which is going to be mostly clothing and heavy clothing. There's also a little wealth rule that most of the clothing and heavy clothing obviously varies in value according to how much you can afford and social standing. So there's a way to sort of, well, frankly, make the clothing and the heavy clothing suits more expensive based upon your social standing. Certainly, if you want to maintain and exude a particular social standing, you'll need to
Oh,
spend more
sure.
money. Yeah, obviously
Like if
yeah,
you're a noble and you're looking at the plate,
right.
3,200 might be the Scrubbo Knight that just happens to have
Could be,
gotten his hands on anything.
right. Well, although I think I make this, although I would say merely by owning plate and mail that costs over 3,000 pennies implies you're noble. It really does, because they're the
Oh,
only
sure.
ones that. So some of these heavier armors are a social status. There's no doubt, um, and certainly would mark you as a warrior. But yeah, the wealth is mostly applied to the lower, to page 113, right? The basic armor suit is clothing, which is only 100 pennies, but that reflects the material
Mm-hmm.
of your average freeman. So who only has a
A
wealth,
single set of clothes.
right, and a wealth number of, say, a 5 or a 6. It's keyed to a 6. But if you're a wealth 70 baron, yeah, you could easily just multiply that out. You would easily be spending 1,000 pennies on your
Mm-hmm.
silk, and really soft leather was a status symbol in most feudal Western based cultures. Now, HarnMaster in the past, and it can be expanded, has gone into precise enumeration of the material of clothing. Right? It's not just the almost canvas-like rugged material used by the lower classes, but you can get into the various wools and this sort of thing. So this is a gloss, and it can certainly be expanded to manifest the more detailed descriptions of exactly. But I guess what I'm saying is, yeah, if you encounter a noble in the clothing suit, it's likely worth you know easily 500 pennies, but likely even 1,000. This sort of thing. Okay, and so yeah, you've got it entered in on your character sheet. Let's you would select, and the weapons, the armaments, the sidearms, swords and axes.
Mm-hmm.
That is very much affected by your social class. Hardmaster has always marked certain weapons as chivalric, and this is based upon history to a certain extent. Yeah, to a great extent, I suppose. And it's discussed on page 96, especially in feudal realms, right, where 2/3 of the population are under the thumb of those in the plate and mail. So, and it discusses three broad categories, common weapons, what are typically allowed, simple weapons is the term used for what freemen are allowed to essentially be armed with, and not unduly cause attention or punishment. And then there's a category of chivalric weapons. One thing I do want to point out that I think is often not understood or ignored, or sometimes erroneously exaggerated, is that it doesn't mean that knights, like the true nobility, are the only ones allowed to wield a battle sword or a warhammer. It means that, and certainly their common man at arms would men at arms would wield more powerful weapons, but they need the permission or sanction of their lord. So
Yeah,
when
you're
you
not just
go,
walking around with that.
yeah, and they can, and what's in fact they could. What I mean is the town guard could very easily be armed with a poleaxe,
Hmm.
even though he is merely a freeman, but he's sanctioned by those in power to bear this chivalric arm. So the town guard, might have a spear most likely, but could be sanctioned to wield a poleaxe. And certainly in pitched battle, the knight would want to arm their men at arms in the best weapons possible. Now, because of expense, well, and actually the spear is the most dominating weapon in a pitched battle, certainly. So I just wanted to say that the social interaction of weapons, the interaction of the society with the allowable weapons, is certainly a factor in Kethira in Harn world, but uh, it's not this absolute stricture to a certain extent. It's but long story short, if you're what happens when you're like in your case, you're a freeman,
Hmm.
um, and so it's a matter of what attention you want to call to yourself. If you don the male byrny, people are going to see you as a soldier. If you walk into a for you know a neighboring manor where they don't know you and you're wearing a male byrny, that will indicate you as a soldier that the Lord might want to know about is wandering around on your manor. But you wouldn't be immediately thrown into jail for but game masters can tweak this as much as they want. I think the core, at the end of the day, there are societal norms, as to what sort of arms and armor you're wearing and manifesting a particular social class. In your case, as this mercenary, as this yeoman, who is now a mercenary, yeah, there's a wide variety of weapons. Obviously, the bow, you'll want to, you know, that would be the main weapon. And again,
Hmm.
we don't need to get in. This could be part of the combat, a combat video. But for instance, to give you an idea of the price of a bow, or you can look at those weapons. Many of them are in the 40, 50, 60. The swords cost over 100, some of them close to over 200 pennies, right? So you can see, bows are on page 109. They're not quite as expensive. Depending on the draw, they can be 50, 60, 70 pennies. So if you've already spent 400, you can see that you'll very quickly get into the 600 pennies spent range. Uh,
Yep. Yeah, and I imagine probably a short sword to go with it is all he's gonna have, right?
right. Yeah, right. That's 96 pennies, nearly
Hmm.
100. So between and a dagger is 12 or 24. So you'll easily be spending 150 on just basic arms. A shield runs you another 60 or whatever. So you're already over 500, closing in on 600.
Remind me where draw comes into play, because it's been about
Oh, sure. Yeah, let's look at
3
that real
months
quick.
since I read through that section.
Yeah, let's go to the bows on page 109.
Hmm.
The composite bow is a very specific bow to cultures of the southeast of Anarive. But in on the island of Harn, they're all self bows, otherwise called long bows. Man, this is another historical bit that I discussed, that self bows have almost always been longish, dating back to prehistory even. So, they're roughly about the height of a person. Um,
Hmm.
and their draw, how far you draw back the bow, is is a function really of your arm span, this sort of thing. Um, so the draw is how strong of a bow, and there's no technical physical difference between a light hunting bow and a heavy war bow. They're all about 5 or 6 feet tall, right? It's just the function. So a hunting bow, you don't need quite the draw you need. It depends on the animal you're hunting, but that's where looking at this longbow table, essentially the and it's kind of an interest or you have to be careful about how you read this table. It's split down the middle so that you
Mm-hmm.
read,
Weapon
the first
quality.
3 rows on the left, and then are essentially hunting bows, and that's just based upon the draw weight. It's all arbitrary, though. You could go hunting with a heavy draw war bow if you want. Would likely obliterate the pigeon that you're hunting, but um, but if you're wanting, well, how big of a bow can I draw? As all players want to know, you add your missile, your archery ML, which for you was 68, I believe,
It is 68.
68, and then you add your strength attribute ML, uh, which I think is 80.
It is, yeah. So we're
Um,
148.
148. So you're uh, you're just shy of being able to draw a quite substantial war bow, which would be 150. So there's some goals you want to, if you can get your archery up a bit, if you can practice this a little bit more. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and this is quite realistic, despite being well over 6 feet tall and over 200 pounds. Um, you wouldn't, at least, and you know, uh, you would not be an atypical warbow archer. Certainly in the 13th or 14th century, you would have trained since you were 8 years old, and you would need a strength in the 14, 16 range. And so this has been dialed into that historical reality. So you would likely maybe start off with the 125 draw
Yeah.
bow, 63, the quiver and such, and arrows will get you quickly to 100. So yeah, roughly 100 for a sword, 100 for a bow and some arrows. And HMK goes into it's a slightly more detailed
Yeah, you've got your arrowhead types and
arrowhead types, and all the archers out there. Obviously, this could have been the arrowheads could have been divided into 6 types. There's several types of bodkins, but I've just
yeah,
settled
we
on the
can
2 or 3. Um,
yeah, we can save that
yeah,
distinction for the combat vid.
yeah, right. But just to give you so we 400 on the armor,
Mm-hmm.
200 on weapons. You're at 600. Um, you'll be, textile crafts are quite expensive. So we'll hold off on even the possessions, but that, yeah, you can see where you're well on your way to spending your 100 or your 1,000 pennies in possessions and being outfitted appropriately. Uh, you know, you're
Yeah.
looking like the yeoman archer to my mind, and not unreasonably
No, it's
wealthy.
come together, very reasonably without needing to stretch anything.
Uh-huh.
Um,
But I would like
yeah.
to point out that with your standing, as if you remember, was on the wealthy side for your typical background. You're of a gilded sort of level of wealth, but then look how expensive things are. So I think it fairly realistically playing out nicely in terms of the realism of how Kethira and HarnMaster and Harn World like to depict as much as possible that 12th to
Mm-hmm.
14th century, 13th
Oh
century time
no,
span
my
of
character
things.
sheet might have just locked.
Oh,
Yep. Oh, it's not gonna save, is it? I didn't hit save at any point. The nice thing about video is you have video evidence of what
right,
it was.
right. And I,
So
I still have mine from last session of your character. But yeah, all the precious
yeah,
armor
I had that.
values.
That's all right. I can update that. But Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, my thinking there on at least the wealth and stuff, you know, if the story seed is, a trail to Azimir,
Mm,
we're probably
mm-hmm,
dealing in metals, like trading
mm-hmm.
goods for metals, and you're going to pay a hefty price to get good people for that, like to guard
Oh,
that stuff.
oh, right. Yeah,
So
that's a good point.
maybe it's an upfront payment that just
Mm-hmm.
bumped me up, and I'm sitting at the beginning of this journey,
Right.
something like that. There's depending on how you were structuring the campaign, that would fit for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's looking good. Tell you what, let's take a brief look at one last page of character gen. And
Yeah,
we've
hang on. I gotta
actually
kill reader and restart it.
okay.
Close the program. Yep, and bring it back. It's recovered. Yes, recover. Survey says. Did we get it? We got it. We're in.
Nice.
Let me just bring that over here again. So we lost. I entered the melee weapon names, but everything else looks to be here.
Okay.
So let me reopen HMK core. All right, what page?
Well, yeah, slight backtrack. We finished the character gen step 14. The last bit
Hmm.
was the religious details. There's back on page 55. Um, well, the last bit of character gen could almost be a step 15, but it was the next page, page 56, displays the page 2 of the character sheet where we've been touring here the last 45 minutes. And it takes you through what essentially much of what you've already done, right? There's a little sub-step where you enter in the armor values.
Mm-hmm.
So you filled a lot of that out. There's a couple of attributes. I discussed encumbrance. Let's look at your move trait. And that's really the only one I wanted to point out.
Sure.
And I'll tell you,
Where does that live?
oh, the move trait is on page 2 of the character sheet at the top in
Got
the
it.
middle movement.
Here we go.
Yeah, move trait. There's the core way to figure this out is in this little sub step number 7. It's given on the left hand side, and then it's shown where step 7 applies on the character sheet. Uh, you have a base move of 50. You add to this a modifier derived from the average of your agility,
Mm-hmm.
and strength. And then you round up if agility is greater, which of course it isn't. So you have an agility of 7 and a strength of 16, which equals 23.
Yep.
Divided by 2, rounded down, is an 11, correct?
Correct.
So you look in the first column of those two little subtables, you find this average in the 10 to 11 range. The modifier is a 0. So in the core rule of movement, you would have a move of 50. I got to
Mm-hmm.
tell you, I always use the move calculation option, and because what it realistically takes into account is your stature,
Mm.
and for you, if it's kind of fun, that's really why I want to use it. So all you do is you take that same number, you still do the agility and strength bit, and you would be sitting at a 50. But you
Yep.
look up the height trait, and
Yep.
for
Some great.
you, it was great. So that's going to give you a plus 10, which raises it to a 60. But your frame trait, which was heavy,
Yep.
subtracts 5.
A bit of a lumbering tank.
Lumbering guy, yeah. So you end up using this option with a move of 55. And so you would type in 55 in that column, in the space that's next to move. And that essentially means when you take the move action in combat, you get to move 55 feet or 11 spaces on a grid. And that's basically equal to a jog if you're wondering, how much What is that? At a 7 mile an hour jog is essentially, I guess you're going 8 miles an hour, right? Because you have a move 55. An effective would be if you have any encumbrance. But for now, you're wearing the quilt coat without encumbrance. And so the effective would be 55.
Yeah.
And then you keep going down the rows. Half of your move 55, you always round down to a 0 or a 5. Um, it just, I suppose you could keep track of discrete results, but it makes it easy converting it to spaces. So 55 divided by 2 is technically a 20, right? Your
Yep.
full move is the effective score. So your full score is a 55, and then double is a 110. So when you're all out sprinting, and by the way, HMK combat rounds are now officially 5 seconds long. And there's
Okay.
various reasons for having. They used to be 10 seconds in previous editions. There's several reasons why they are better off at 5 seconds. So this all works out nicely in terms of our attributes and the feet per round and a realistic, reasonable speed of various people. And yeah, you can crunch this, and some people are. I think you can top out with a 75. Yeah, I think it's a 75 is the highest move rating, which gets pretty close to, it's a little less reasonably than modern day Olympic sprinting, this sort of thing. And actually, it's much less. I think, one of the options in the character gen is if you want to introduce new skills. I think if you really wanted to get modern day sprint speed, you would need to introduce a sprint skill, and you would have to develop it, and sort of thing.
Sorry, one quick clarification as I'm filling
Yeah.
in the sheet. What is the difference between full? Oh, effective is modified by my encumbrance. Okay, that's what the difference is.
Yeah, that's right. The character sheet could probably stand to have a darkened, thicker bar, bar below the word effective, right? Because that you really want the half full double to be demarcated a little better. That might be interesting.
Oh yeah, I see we've done that over here on some of the other ones. Yeah, it's okay. I think that makes sense. Why don't we say?
Yeah.
Is there anything under the advice and options that we want to round out this discussion with?
Oh yeah. Let's see. We did. This is that's a good idea. I do page 57 at the end of I think every chapter. Starting with chapter 2 at least. There is this specially scroll treated page section called advice and options, where sometimes I'm just explaining rules in more detail. But as you can see by the little white boxes to the left of some of these headers, these are considered optional rules. This is a tradition. This is a gesture that's common in the tradition of HarnMaster of all these optional rules, and Crosby was always encouraged this sort of I think probably more so than other games. All games have house rules and such, but I think I always appreciated that encouragement to tweak the game in the way you want. The central option that is oh, go ahead.
I will say I like that it's in the core book and it's not in some companion book or something like that.
Yeah. They've been mostly moved to these final pages of the chapters, and this was a personal layout choice. Sometimes the excessive sprinkling of optional rules in the middle of the core explication, to me, it was a distraction. But this was just my choice. Every now and then I'll mention an optional rule, but I wanted them relegated to these various pages. And in fact, what's already happening online, especially from our Discord channel, is an accumulation of interesting new suggestions or clarifications. So in the spirit of the old Dragon magazine sage advice, right? I think every 6 months it might be interesting to publish a free download of PDF of advice and options, So but the most important,
I think it's worth pointing out that there's no shortage of free downloads as it is.
Oh, good.
right? Like,
Right.
Celestia has all sorts of occupation article
Hmm.
downloads for different locations and stuff. So if folks are just sticking to the book and not checking those out, do yourself a favor and check them out.
Yeah. No, that's good. Yeah, you're right. Appreciate you pointing that out. The central optional rule that I want to point out on this page are the perception attributes. This is a, in
Hmm.
fact, yeah, this is a non-starter for many HarnX. You're not playing HarnMaster unless you have eye, hearing, and smell, and I appreciate that standpoint. I don't support it, or I don't agree with it mostly, but no, I get the itch to roll up eye, hearing, and smell every now and then, and it needs to be encouraged. Uh, and so this is a skills table that completely replaces the one on page 46.
Hmm.
And just as a quick playtest report for veterans out there, yeah, I had people want to walk away because eye, hearing, and smell was no longer core. I had some playtesters sigh with relief and didn't even want the eye, hearing, smell mentioned as an option. I disagree with both extremes, but I did choose to put the perception unified attribute in the core and call this an option. But that was just my own subjective choice. But this table, I think, is was necessary, a requirement, so you can go in and see where the skills slightly change. Right, alchemy is now an aura smell skill
Hmm.
based upon your sense of smell, and awareness changes slightly. And we can get into obviously it's there's discussion about how the awareness skill was treated in previous editions, and also the entire discussion of the reduction from 3 attribute skill based to 2. Uh, but you can see now you have 3 awareness skills: sight, sound, and odor. And
Yep.
um, mastery,
I mean,
everything else functions the same. So
yeah, I get your point about like it's using the average between the three, and then the average is also the individual. I also get the point that if you're a GM who really brings in kind of that set dressing,
mm-hmm.
like that can really kind of play into your style. So
Sure.
yeah,
Right.
I like the options. I like the optionality.
Cool. Cool. Yeah. So that's, believe it or not, what are we, 2 hours into another, some length. Yeah, that brings to an end, I think, that character's generation, except for on the Silver Way.
Mm-hmm.
Where does the character come in? And we'll start, there's basically just 2 points to make here. Is, as a game master, I'm offering you, where your character may have been born in Caldor. If you recall, in the last video, we determined he was from the kingdom of Caldor and that he was rural, but it was never discussed where. And now I think you can, there's a map in on the Silver Way. Um,
I can probably pull that up. Give me one
can
second.
you might be able to pull that up? Okay.
Layer maps. Here we go. Ooh, we're gonna give away the crown jewels here. Is it in the full
Oh yeah,
PC sheets? Tracking
yeah.
map.
Yeah. It's down page. Oh, actually above. Go back one.
There we
There.
go.
Yeah, you can. I don't know if you can zoom in much on that.
Should be able to. The question is my crop going to
Oh,
annihilate it?
that's plenty.
Okay.
Because yeah, what I wanted to point out was there is and this would be written in back on page 1 uh, in the birth section of the character sheet, and we don't need to go back to it. But remember, you might recall that there's 2 rows for your birthplace. You
Mm-hmm.
type in Kingdom of Caldor. Well, I've zeroed in. You'll see actually on this map on the Silver Way a keep town called Ninda.
Yep, right
That's
here.
yeah, right, and it's kind of the last stop before the trade. It's a trade cross. Uh, a trade center to a certain extent. I mean, the population I think is in the 300s or 400s, which is a kind of a moderately small town, right? But it much trade comes through there. And there's a village that I've pinpointed that's maybe 4 or 5 leagues to the west of that. It doesn't appear on this map, but that's your hometown, and
Okay.
it's Teradir is the name of it. Um, Terodiir, Teradir, uh, and it's a one of the small manors, and this is where your parents lived and where you grew up. Um,
Perfect.
and so probably what's happened, there's a character in the on the Silver Way named Asdar, and he's a mercenary, well, not a mercenary, but a member of the Low Guard of the Kingdom of Azadmir. But he currently resides in Meldarine, and he's friends with another character named Elbin, who's a scholar and but sort of a man who has trekked, throughout the eastern parts of Harn, and who had befriended another one. So I think it's through those, probably through Asdar, maybe that you've met, or it might even be that Elbin is a scholar, but kind of having a reputation as an esotericist,
Hmm.
and has maybe hired you, is what I'm getting at, in the past. And the party, right before it launches up the Silver Way, where the adventure begins, perhaps they came across you in Ninda, which is where I think, even though you're not from Ninda, you're from the smaller village uh, that's to the west, about half a day's journey. Perhaps you reside in Ninda. That's where you moved when you were sort of run out of town, of the
Sure.
manor village, and it could have just been a happenstance meeting. Um, and we, with the other players, we would discuss that more, and it might make more sense that either Elbin or Asdar would know you, but maybe at the last minute, they were looking for more protection as they went up the Silver Way. Uh, Knowing, because usually larger groups of people, in fact, maybe, I'm sort of lapsing into the game already, but, people usually don't trek up the Silver Way. Certainly merchant groups don't, unless heavily protected. I mean, it's
Hmm.
so the idea that only 3 or 4 people are trekking up there. You may have resisted, initially, as well. That's a crazy idea, but maybe the price was right, this sort of thing.
I
But
like it.
that I think we would be ready to play next week with the other players, get together and start the game.
I think so. I think we got everything we need. I got to come up with a name, but
That right, that's right. And
that's
you would fill out
a
your
Caldoric
possessions.
name at that.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Like I said, there's various
hmm,
sources for that. But don't be. I think one of the joys of Harn World is all the various cultural and linguistic details, and you can track that down. And there are certainly maybe norms that you should follow. But the other thing is just make a name up, and then now
yeah.
that's canon. When
As long as it sounds halfway real.
yeah, sure, sure. It's canon for our campaign, whatever name you come up with. Uh,
There we go. Well, I'm gonna have to abstain from reading The Silver Way so that I
okay.
don't spoil our any of our combat examples or anything like that for
Oh yeah.
myself.
Okay. Good. Good. And yeah,
Um,
that might be a.
yeah,
Mu-
so that's something we're gonna do at some point. And I think I'll release this maybe in a week or two. Maybe sit on it for a week just so we kind of space things out.
sure.
Um, and yeah, is there anything else you would want to throw out there that
I
folks should
think
take a look at, or I
no,
think we covered everything.
we did. Yeah, you covered my list, and then I veered into various other discussions that uh, were marginally apropos. I think,
Mm-hmm.
but I think the character gen. I think we cover it now. I'm glad we did this follow up video. I know it's another 2 hours for people or however long, but yeah, we kind of left off these couple of last important uh,
Yeah, and
aspects. But
certainly there's things that we didn't get into for priest characters, or
mhm,
if we're really going to do Shek Pravar, that's a whole separate video on the mysteries, like you noted.
right, right, yeah.
But
But
I
I
feel like
feel,
this covers a lot of ground, regardless.
and even during character gen, you were able to learn about the three core mechanics, or it's really just a single unified skill test mechanic, right? The
Hmm.
D100, you learned about the
Yep.
critical results. You made this success. I've kind of forgotten that you end up making, or can make, success value tests during character gen, during the character detail part. You learn about what an index is. Here's another pitch I've made elsewhere. HarnMaster has a lot of detail to it. It certainly Harn World does, right? But the core mechanic is as basic role player BRP people know, is quite simple and elegant.
Hmm.
It covers. I describe Harn as a broad system. This core simple mechanic covers a lot of ground. There, I don't think there's an onerous amount of player skill, or how can I put this? That the depth of subsystems does not really exist. When you're making a character, you don't need to know various layers of feats and abilities, and I guess that can be limiting for this idea of a certain approach. But I don't think there's a high player mastery in HarnMaster. I think once you get the success test down, you're ready to go. It does get into the hit locations and this sort of thing of the combat. Uh, but aside from that, you know everything about the system. You
Hmm.
you increase your character's power through skill ML. Um, at the end of every session, there's a couple of ways you can do it. The classic way is very similar to basic role playing. If you use that skill in the game, then you can make a roll to see if it goes up by one. I've always preferred HarnMaster's modest increase of +1 ML. No, the skill increases in basic role playing have uh, increased quite a bit, right? Sometimes it used to be a D6 and a D10, I forget, but it also depends on how long you're playing these campaigns. But I think,
That's a big component. If you're playing only once a month or something, bump that
yeah,
up. You know.
right. Um, but I will say, all in all, depending on, no matter what skill increase system, and there's a new one that's been introduced in HMK that uses experience points. Uh, and I discussed that enough in the rules about why that was introduced. But I think overall, the power level, you would expect it to be flatter. There's not this dramatic, and that can be for better or worse depending on what game you're looking for. But I do find it interesting that D&D over the last couple editions has attempted, the bounded accuracy and all this. They've tried to reduce some of the extreme power level differences, there between a first and a 20th level character, and seem to be going in the direction of wanting a little flatter progression themselves.
Hmm.
And that's the classic game of level increases and this sort of thing. But in HarnMaster, not unlike RuneQuest, the notice your character starts off at a 70 in the 2 or 3 main skills. Depending on
Yeah,
how long you
he's
play, it might
fairly
never get
competent in places.
it.
A lot of that has to do with the fact that we rolled a mature character.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you rolled an experienced HarnMaster character that may have
Hmm.
would attain these levels, after X amount of gameplay, but you've started there. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, certainly we could have focused things.
but notice, even if you were young, your MLs would at most be, 10 or 15 lower, or what. It wouldn't be dramatically less, but it would have been slightly less. Okay, I don't want to, but that's at the end of the, if I was sort of role playing the fact maybe that, we're starting this campaign, you hadn't played HarnMaster before, so to give you a little
Well, that's
indication of what.
accurate. I mean,
Okay, well then,
I've been
yeah,
doing the
well,
show for a year, as
right,
of the other week, and my group is working through different games, but we haven't gotten HarnMaster to the table yet.
Yeah.
So
Well, I'll certainly you can we'll get you at this table at least, through playtest and do some of the combat. But that's what I think you could, gaming groups have different tastes for how quickly and how important the character improvement is. I think
mhm.
everyone would agree to some extent it's important. I appreciate the flatter power progression because I like how the game stays a challenge without having to. The creatures that are a challenge, the creatures and the foes that are a challenge to you in the first game session will be similarly challenging throughout the entire experience. And I think that helps the verisimilitude and why people enjoy gaming in sort of a gritty, realistic world. But no, you can definitely see improvement, and some of the improvement and development, like in all RPGs, has to do with the story itself. Uh,
Mhm.
you know, which applies to any game, and certainly applies here too. Um, well,
Yeah.
I think you're ready to go.
I think we have left it all on the field. Thanks once again for
All
joining
right.
me.
Yeah.
This is super cool. I think the response was really good to the first episode, and folks are going to pick up even more things here
Yeah. I,
with your. I think it's one thing to walk through the rules. It's another thing to have the director commentary along with it. That's
oh, well, I
a big
appreciate
deal.
you. Yeah. I enjoy it. Yeah. I think, and we found that typo too, which of course I haven't forgotten.
That one's minor.
Yeah. No,
I
that's
think
fine.
folks would figure that out pretty quick. But
um,
yeah, well, why don't we call it a wrap? Thanks again.
yeah.
We'll be back for some combat at some point, and we'll see when that happens.
Appreciate it, Carrie.